The original Resident Evil 4 changed the series up from being a survival horror series to a more action horror series, and it primarily did this by implementing the over-the-shoulder perspective. With this, they were able to showcase more action-oriented gameplay that we would see throughout Resident Evil 4, and for that, Resident Evil 4 ended up being one of the most popular games in the series, and even to this day is still regarded as one of the best, which is why we see it get ported to pretty much every platform ever since its debut on the GameCube. But now we have the remake that is scheduled to release early next year, and I have begun to wonder, could it be possible for this remake to actually surpass the original? Obviously, there are certain things about this remake that right off the bat are going to be better than the original. Like, for example, the graphical capabilities. Clearly, this is going to be a superior element to the remake than what the original had, as there is a nearly 20-year difference between the two games, and that's one of the big reasons that games get remade anyways, is to give them a more modernized look. So, graphically speaking, the remake will be better. Another thing is gameplay. The gameplay for this remake is going to be vastly superior to what they had to offer back in 2005, and we've already seen that in some of these trailers, such as the new parrying system where you can actually use your knife to parry enemy attacks. This is a huge deal because this is absolutely something that was not featured in the original Resident Evil 4, so it's going to be really cool to see this new element, this new mechanic featured in the remake. Something else is the simple ability to be able to move around and shoot your gun at the same exact time. The original Resident Evil 4, you could not do that. You still had those old school tank controls where you had to stop your forward motion to be able to use your gun. So it's going to be really cool to be able to actually move around and shoot in the remake, as it will give the game a much more fluid feel with the action elements. So I'm looking forward to that. So when it comes to the graphical capabilities and the gameplay abilities, the remake is obviously going to be better. However, that doesn't mean there's no advantages for the original. There are certain things that the original will still have over this remake. One of those being the almighty nostalgic factor. Clearly, since it's been almost nearly 20 years with the original, there's going to be a lot of nostalgia because lots of people who grew up playing that game, it's going to be tough for us to really look past our nostalgia and call this remake the better version because, as I've said, we've had nearly 20 years playing it, and because it's been ported on so many platforms, it's been kind of hard not to have played it by now. So nostalgia is definitely going to be a real thing, and it's going to be interesting to see if this remake can overcome that nostalgia factor. Another thing is the uniqueness factor. When Resident Evil 4 first came out back in 2005, that was the first time anything like that was ever shown off in Resident Evil. Before that, it was all about fixed camera angles and going up against viruses and zombies and all this other stuff. And then when Resident Evil 4 came out, it completely switched around. We had over the shoulder, it was about Plaga, you had Ganados and all this other stuff that was just thrown in there. And so it was completely unique and fresh. Whereas this remake, I'm sure there will be some new elements that we never seen before, such as the parrying mechanic system and stuff like that. So obviously new things will get thrown in there, but for the most part, it's going to be a lot of familiar stuff that we had already seen in the original, just given a modern day look. And so it won't have that massive, fresh, unique feel that the original had. So that's going to be a massive advantage for the original. So clearly there's going to be certain components for each one, and it's going to be really cool to see once this game actually comes out next year and we get a chance to play it, which one we end up actually preferring. Will we prefer the original still, or will we prefer this remake? I can't wait to find out because my track record, personally, I tend to prefer the originals because when it came to Resident Evil 2 and 3, I played both the originals and the remakes, and I still to this day think the originals are better. But to be fair, we did have pretty much 20 years of playing those two games, RE2 and 3, before they got remade. So my nostalgia for them built up stronger and stronger. So there is that component. But at the same time, I do have to say, when it comes to Resident Evil 1, I prefer that remake. I think that remake is better than the original. However, we did only have 6 years to build up any sort of nostalgia or anything like that with the original before it got remade. So that is also an element. I'm just looking forward to see how this goes. Based off these trailers, looks like it's staying very faithful to the original game, much like how the Resident Evil 1 game stayed extremely faithful to it without reimagining too many components. So I think that there is a argument that this could be better than the original. Obviously, we'll have to wait and see when we actually get to play it whether or not that is true or not, because you can't base that off of a handful of trailers and stuff like that. So we will find out once this game actually drops and we get a chance to play it whether or not it will surpass the original. I think that's a tall order for anyone who played the original, because we know how impactful that game was when it dropped and how impactful it is even to this day. So it's going to be fascinating. I'm very interested. And there's also that possibility that when we do finally get to play this remake, that at the end of it, both the original and the remake are just equals in their own unique way. So that's also an option that could potentially happen as well. It's going to be really cool to see, but I will go ahead and wrap up this video here, and I will see you all on the next one. See you then.